Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the Book Club of California's Southern California program titled Bar Keeps, a collection of California's best cocktail napkins. Thank you all for joining us here at Pasadena Heritage's beautiful and historic Lynn House. We love it here, our Southern California home. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to host the event this evening. For those of you who might be new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit, member, and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with a focus on the history and literature of California and the West. The Book Club publishes limited edition books, finely made books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed, and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest, but the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So I encourage you to visit us online at bccbooks.org to join or to donate to the book club. And now for tonight's program and our presenter. Again, the program is titled Bar Keeps, a collection of California's best cocktail napkins. Do you know how the cocktail got its name? Ever wonder why pink elephants symbolize a cinematic good time? Or have you asked yourself why there are napkins that picture women rolling naked in champagne glasses? Well, our presenter tonight, Patrick Quinn, will answer those and other startling questions while providing a look at how bars and cocktail napkins bonded and became the passion of collectors worldwide. So I'm looking out there. Are you really not that into drinking? Some people aren't, but who doesn't want a visual treat, right? A good laugh and a look back at the Golden State in its golden age. Tonight, Patrick Quinn, a production designer, author, and a collector, will guide us through a rollicking road trip with cocktail napkins to savor. Patrick Quinn knew he wanted to be a writer when he was still in high school, and he began submitting short stories to literary magazines while he was still in junior college. I don't know if you know I'm going to say all this stuff about you.
I know.
Is it a surprise? Well, before long, he started working at Universal Studios Hollywood, first as a performer, and eventually became a member of the creative team for the park's annual Halloween Horror Nights event. At some point, he began collecting vintage LPs. This led to an interest in other vintage oddities like snapshots, telegrams, restaurant menus, matchbooks, maps, and assorted paper ephemera. In the spring of 2017, Patrick and his wife were enjoying a lazy Sunday wandering the aisles of a local flea market. That's how the story goes, at least. Then he noticed that one of his favorite dealers had something unusual for sale. It was a cardboard box filled with cocktail napkins from the 1960s and the 1970s. Attracted by the kitschy graphics, he dug in, assuming he'd only pick a handful, but it soon became apparent that he had to have them all, hundreds of them. And suddenly Patrick Quinn had a new collecting obsession. He had no idea that that obsession would lead to his first book, Bar Keeps, a collection of California's best cocktail napkins from Angel City Press. And the folks from Angel City Press are with us tonight at the back of the room, and they do have the book. If you're interested in checking it out either during the presentation or maybe better to wait till after the presentation. Now, if you have any questions for our speaker during the presentation, let's hold those until the end. We'll certainly have time at the end of the presentation to take questions, and I'll come back up to the podium to help to do that. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker. He's an author and a collector, Patrick Quinn.
Wow, the intro's better than what I've got here. Hi, this is fun. I've been doing these events for the past few months. I've done a variety of types. I've been in a few events where I didn't have quite a few people show up, and in fact, I have a couple where nobody showed up. But then I've also had ones where it was a packed house. But this is nice because I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces and friends here, which is great. I knew being in Pasadena would be great for that because it's so close to so many people I know. So basically, I won't introduce myself. He's did a wonderful job with that. So I'm going to get right into this little presentation. Let's get this party started. So first of all, why do I collect napkins? As you heard, I found a box of them at the PCC swap meet. And I wasn't planning to, it wasn't something I collected. I collect vintage photographs, telegrams, records, things like that. And I saw these and I thought, oh, these are kind of cool, I'll buy a few. But then once I got into them, it's a combination of things. It's these amazing graphics, the illustrations are incredible, and it's one of the sadder parts of this is no one gets credit. I've yet to find, I can count on one hand the amount of times I found an artist's name on the napkin. They usually only mention the company. And the art is amazing. But it's also a snapshot of a different time period. Most of these are from the 50s and 60s, maybe the 70s. And they really capture this period of history. It's like a Mad Men episode on paper. It's awesome. So I started getting into it, and I've discovered that one of the things that's kind of cool is that they're hard to find. It's not like matchbooks or menus. Lots of people collect those, and lots of people sell them. But cocktail napkins, they weren't made to last. So not that many people save them, so it's been more of a hunt. And I go to flea markets and eBay, of course. And every once in a while I get lucky. I bought a stash of 125 napkins yesterday. I'm so excited to get them in the mail. But that's kind of that makes it fun in a way. The thrill of the hunt. So once I started getting the collection, I thought, well, how come no one's done a book? And I did the research, and I discovered lots of books on other things, vintage paper, ephemera of different types, but no one had done one on cocktail napkins. In fact, they rarely even mentioned them. So I started doing query letters to publishers and got a few rejections, mostly didn't get a reply, but luckily one of the few people who did reply was Angel City Press, who does amazing books, all California-centric focused. And so things worked out. We signed a contract, and they hooked me up with Eric Linksweiler as my graphic designer, who unfortunately was going to be here tonight, but he had some family issues that he had to take care of, so he sends his regards. But he did an amazing job. He really was my partner on this book. So I'd like to do a little setup. I want to read you an abbreviated version of the book's introduction, which I hope sets the tone of what I was trying to do. For decades, taverns and saloons had been dark caves filled with middle-aged men smoking old golds and drinking Rainer ale. But the end of the Second World War introduced a new generation of Americans, what journalist Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation. In 1946, the baby boom led to the housing boom, a wave of suburban expansion that swept across the country. Along with shopping centers and grocery stores, these new homeowners had a choice of neighborhood night spots. And unlike those musty old taverns, suburban cocktail lounges were designed for a younger crowd, men and women who are ready to blow off some steam and cut a rug, married couples who had hired a babysitter and were desperate to get out of the house for the night. They drank stiff drinks with names like Slow Gin Fizz, Whiskey Sour, Havana Cooler, and Singapore Sling. Tiki bars took patrons on a trip to the South Seas with bandleader Martin Denny as their tour guide. Western-themed roadhouses, exotic Chinese lounges, and south-of-the-border cantinas provided an escape no matter what part of the country you lived in. Their cocktail napkins featured kahuna totems, bucking broncos, and crooning mariachi singers, surefire guarantees of a good time. The cocktail napkins in my book are ephemeral artifacts from the past. Most of them date from the 1950s and 60s. And the messages they communicated are a reflection of their times. Excessive drinking, smoking, sexism, adultery, even racism were once thought of as humorous. Labels like not PC and designated driver didn't exist back then. They are souvenirs of cocktail lounges that have come and gone, raised over by the bulldozer of progress. This collection is my way to try and reconnect with that time. So why not pull off the highway and park the convertible out back, walk in the door, drop a quarter in the juke, order an old-fashioned, and let's pretend it's Saturday night. Of course, in this case, it's Wednesday night, but go with me. So, I think we'll get started on a little road trip, and we'll take a trip to San Francisco. I just did this talk up in Santa Rosa, and it was so much fun. It was the first time I'd done this in Northern California, and the reactions were great, because it's like, down here, most people don't know these places, but I was getting hoots and hollers just for this one. So, first of all, in San Francisco, one of the things they had that was kind of unique were they had these Hofbrau's. It's an East Coast tradition, but San Francisco brought it over. And it's basically these bars that would serve small meals that were really cheap, and it kind of encouraged people to hang out and keep drinking because they could have something to eat quickly. Tommy's Joint is actually still around and has been since 1947 and is world famous for their turkey dinners. Bimbo's is also still open and has been since 1931. And just in case you get the wrong idea, bimbo is actually the Italian word for little boy, and that's where the name came from. By the way, I just want to point out that the whiskey sours at the Gangplank are awesome. One of my favorite stories. Sally Stamford was the madam of a Nob Hill bordello, popular with Errol Flynn, Humphrey Bogart, and various local politicians. But in 1949, she went legit and opened a restaurant in Sausalito, the Valhalla Inn. City officials tried to close her down, and they didn't buy her attempt at legitimacy. So she decided to get her revenge and ran for a seat on the city council. It took her 5 tries, but she got the seat. And Sally was so popular, she was elected mayor of Sausalito in 1976. She retired after 1 term, but the council named her vice mayor for life. The Domino Club, a nightclub whose owner, Charlie Anderson, was also an art collector, and he had this massive collection of classic nude paintings that he decorated the entire restaurant with. And in fact, on the certain weekend nights, he would bring in Italian artist Roberto Lepetti, who would paint portraits of nude models posing in the center of the restaurant while diners watched. Ironically, years later, the Vatican hired Lepetti to help restore the Sistine Chapel. Wow. Roberts at the Beach. There's a waterfront bar owned by Shorty Roberts, who made a bet that his horse Blackie could swim across the San Francisco Bay. Blackie made it in 23 minutes with Shorty swimming behind him, one hand clutching on his tail. The day I got that postcard was a good day. So, bartenders. Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines a bartender as a person who serves drinks in a bar. That's it. For decades, the stereotypical bartender was a guy who looked like Ernest Borgnine and served Boilermakers to off-duty construction workers. But back in the 1940s, there was no such thing as a mixologist, and no one was pouring anything that resembled a craft cocktails. Bartenders were variations of Nick, the guy who ran the bar for Mr. Martini in It's a Wonderful Life. And Nick made it clear he was there to serve hard drinks to men who wanted to get drunk fast, and he didn't need characters around to give the joint atmosphere. But society's views on bartenders have changed. Now when the Iceman cometh, he goes to his local version of Cheers, where everybody knows his name. And if he's lucky, Isaac from the Love Boat has the weekend shift. Yeah. Not so lucky, it's Lloyd from the Overlook. Yeah. Ironically, the bartender that most people know only served 1 drink, Duff beer. I'm pretty sure Mo from The Simpsons and Nick would have got along famously. So let's go a little more international on our travels. American restaurants before the turn of the century were all about steaks and seafood. But immigrants from Europe began to change the dining landscape. Some of these places are still open today. But for every ongoing success story, there were hundreds of noteworthy restaurants that are long gone but still remembered. Not just for the food they served, but for the resilience of the immigrants who created them. Little Joe's was actually the last restaurant of Los Angeles' long-thriving Italian district. This actually used to be downtown. They finally closed their doors in 1998, long before downtown LA got revitalized. I actually went there. I had read an article in the LA Weekly about the closing, so I went down there, and it was really sad. It was a big restaurant. It was all banquet halls, probably served 1,000 people on a Saturday night, but it was empty. There was like a couple of dozen hardcore customers wandering around and a few waiters. They were sharing stories, and I think that might have been where I first picked up the interest in connecting with these old places and how important historical restaurants and bars and just anything is to patronize, to keep them going and not just show up the weekend they close. The Paris Inn opened in 1924, and it was the first restaurant in Los Angeles to have singing waiters. You can thank or blame owner Umberto Rivera for that bit of history. And if you're curious, the phrase there on the bottom, "On mange bien à l'omelette," means we eat well with the omelet. The Rubaiyat was the very first restaurant in America to offer Armenian cooking. The owner, George Mardikian, probably mangling that right, was appointed food consulate for the U.S. Army and completely changed the meal program for GIs around the world. He later wrote a best-selling cookbook, and in 1951, President Truman gave him the Medal of Freedom for his work with the GIs. Of course, in California, we do love Mexican food. If you are wondering, El Coyote has been around since 1931, but the original El Cholo on Western Avenue is the Golden State's oldest Mexican restaurant. They opened their doors in 1923. Mert and Jake are your hosts of the Rusty Lantern. I'm assuming Mert is short for Myrtle, a wonderful name that we never hear. Somebody needs to name their kid Myrtle. Bring Myrtle back, I say. And I also like to coach ponchos over here. Chinese food, steaks, and Mexican food. Covered no matter what you're in the mood for. I'm sure their chow mein fajitas are delish. We also have a love for Chinese food down here in Los Angeles. And in fact, if you notice that the Temple of Heaven is in New Chinatown, and Jerry's Joint is in Old Chinatown. I have a lot of Chinese restaurant napkins, and they either will call out one or the other. Old Chinatown refers to the original location on Alameda Street that was torn down to make way for the construction of Union Station in 1933. The New Chinatown, the one that we all know today, that was built in 1938. I have no historical trivia or fun anecdotes from the Forbidden Palace. I believe that napkin speaks for itself. But I do have a story about the Flower Drum Song. In 1958, the team of Rodgers and Hammerstein opened a new musical on Broadway called The Flower Drum Song. The plot was set at the Celestial Garden, a nightclub in South San Francisco's Chinatown, which was based on a real club, Forbidden City. In the late 1930s, San Francisco Chinatown was a tourist destination, and Charlie Lowe, who owned the Chinese Village, decided to take his new club to the next level. He added a 10-piece orchestra, a troupe of entertainers, and a large dance floor. Soon he had competitors like Shanghai Lil, the Lion's Den, and Andy Wong's Sky Room, featuring the Wongettes, an act that I would pay to see tonight if they were still performing. Promoters began comparing Asian nightclub stars to Caucasian stars. Larry Ching, on the top right, was billed as the Chinese Frank Sinatra. In the center is Ellen Chen, known as the Chinese Betty Grable. And at the bottom to the left, Paul Wing, headlined as the Chinese Fred Astaire. But by the early 1960s, the novelty had worn off, and the clubs either became discos or topless bars. So let's come a little closer to home, shall we? I think some of these restaurants might be familiar to you. So the It Cafe was actually a bar restaurant in the hotel, that Hollywood Plaza Hotel, that changed names a few times. And its third version was opened by Clara Bow, who, as you probably know, was a silent movie star and original sex symbol who personified the glamour of the Roaring '20s. She was nicknamed the It Girl, starting in a movie called It, but she also starred in Wings, which won the very first Academy Award for Best Picture. But her popularity began to fade once talkies came into vogue. So in 1937, she opened the It Cafe, but she became pregnant a few months later and lost interest, and it ended up turning into a Russian tea room. Speaking of the Oscars, the idea for the Academy Awards was devised in the Crystal Ballroom of the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Louis B. Mayer, who ran MGM Studios, came up with the idea as a semi-joke. He was sitting at a table with a few other execs, and he said, wouldn't it be funny if we gave out awards for, artistic merit instead of just profits? but some of the other people thought it was a good idea, including art director Cedric Gibbons, who drew a concept sketch of the award on a cocktail napkin. And that sketch became the Oscar that we still give out every year. Max Rosenblum was a professional boxer who earned the nickname Slapsy Maxie for his unusual style of fighting. I've seen video that was basically like this. When he retired in 1934, he began a second career as a part-time actor and a full-time club owner. The first Slapsy Maxie opened on Beverly Boulevard. Then in 1943, the club moved to Wilshire Boulevard. But the new venue was a front for mobster Mickey Cohen, who ran his bookmaking operations on the second floor. In 1951, Cohen went to prison for tax evasion, and the second Slapsy Maxies became the Wilshire Bowl. Eventually, the building was destroyed. Meanwhile, the original club on Beverly Boulevard was converted into a movie theater. It first opened in 1960 as The Europe, showing foreign films, and then it became The Eros, which screened adult films. The Eros closed in 1977 and was taken over by new owners who had a different direction in mind. The new Beverly Cinema opened on May 5th, 1978 with a Marlon Brando double feature of A Streetcar Named Desire and Last Tango in Paris. Nearly 30 years later, film director Quentin Tarantino purchased the new Beverly and is still screening classic movies, mostly from his own personal collection of 35mm movies. He's actually going to open the Vista Theater over in Silver Lake pretty soon. So a couple of weeks ago, I was asked to be part of the Modernism Week in Palm Springs. It was very exciting. So just for that event, I assembled a few pages of napkins that had buildings on them, and I just thought they looked really cool, so I left them in there. And it also gave me an excuse to share one of my favorite stories about the Sycamore Inn. The Sycamore Inn was opened in 1849 and is arguably the oldest operating restaurant in California. There's a couple of places that sort of vie for that title. It was opened by a man named William Rubbottom, I didn't make that up, known as Uncle Billy. He came up from Missouri and he brought along a supply of possums to serve on the menu as a Southern delicacy. When he discovered that the locals had no interest in his Southern delicacy, he promptly let the possums run free. They took to the climate, and you could thank Uncle Billy for possums in California. So some of my favorite napkins and the graphics are music-oriented, so I just wanted to share a few of those with you. Dear to my heart, the Hollywood Palladium opened on New Year's Eve, 1940. Tommy Dorsey and his orchestra, featuring then up-and-coming young singer named Frank Sinatra, were the headliners. It soon became a second home for acts such as Glenn Miller, the Andrews Sisters, and Lawrence Welk. The venue is still going strong, and in fact, Jane's Addiction and Iggy Pop are playing this March. Buy tickets now. The Garden of Allah was originally a high-end supper club, but by 1957, plans were made to convert this now vacant club into a Baptist church. That deal fell through, and as fate would have it, the new owners reopened it as a topless bar called Larry Goldfinger's A-Go-Go. Later, the name was changed to Surfer Girl A-Go-Go, but eventually the building was bulldozed, and now it's a Jack-in-the-Box. Now for one of my favorite stories. The Lost Weekend and the House of Harmony both featured live keyboard music, but beyond that, they were quite different. The House of Harmony was a gay piano bar on Polk Street. The Lost Weekend was in North Beach, and the main attraction was a large Wurlitzer organ. The bar was named after the classic 1945 film, The Lost Weekend, with Ray Milland playing an alcoholic trying to get sober. And apparently the owner of the bar had a painting done of him behind the bar serving a drink to Ray Milland, and he hanged that over the bar. I would kill to find a photo of that. Yeah. But later on, in the late 60s, the owner's regular organ player quit, so he had to find a new player. And he found a young man named Anton LaVey. You might know him by his other job as the organizer of the Church of Satan. Lou's Village opened in 1946 and was a San Jose institution until it closed in 2005. The place was known for booking acts that ranged from the Mills Brothers to Sherman's Scatman Crothers. Have you ever seen Scatman Crothers? Look that young. But The act that they are probably most remembered for, at least my favorite act, was Maxine Holman with her educated wolf. Maxine attached a prop wolf head to her shoulders, and she and the wolf performed choreographed dances to the accompaniment of a live orchestra. Again, an act I would see tonight if it was still around. A revival needs to happen. In the early 1960s, a man named Harry Schiller decided to open a burlesque show in West Hollywood. His wife Alice reluctantly agreed, but she insisted that this would be a classy supper club. Alice came up with the name, the Pink Pussycat, and even acted as the club's hostess, greeting female patrons with a pink feather. Marquee headliners had stage names like Fran Sinatra, Samia Davis Jr., and Dina Martin. On occasion, the real Rat Pack would drop by to take in the show. The Schillers hired Sally Marr, a former burlesque star, to train the dancers. Sally Marr's son was the controversial comedian Lenny Bruce, who on occasion would test new material on the Pink Pussycat stage. Ironically, when Harry Schiller's nephew took over the business, he converted the burlesque club into the long-running popular lesbian nightclub Peanuts. If those dressing rooms could talk. So, two of the most popular images in my cocktail napkins are scantily clad women and cocktail glasses. In 1930, photographer Howard Riedel took a black and white photo of a nude woman smoking a cigarette in a stemmed flute glass. The original print is on display in the Metropolitan Museum of Fine Art in New York. It's an iconic image that apparently was a big influence on the graphic artists of the time, or at least the artist who designed cocktail napkins. I've got boxes of them. One thing I forgot to mention, it's kind of interesting, is the cocktail napkins, I have these salesman sampler boxes that I've collected. I have like 3 or 4 different ones. And it's a box, it's like a little shoe box, and it'll have like 100 different napkins, all different types, and it'll just have a little number on it. So apparently these guys would go to the bars and restaurants, and they would go through and they would say, oh, I'll take, a couple of thousand of number 60. So I'll have, like, for example, that one in the center, I have the exact same napkin with like 30, 40 different bars from all across the state and in the East Coast. So it's interesting. And I had in the containers, they range all the way from like these sort of graphic sexist ones to little ones of cute kittens and stuff. You get a little of everything. So let's get to the subject that's near and dear to most people's hearts who enjoy a cocktail, tiki. When he was 20 years old, Ernest Raymond Beaumont Gant left Texas to travel to the South Pacific, where he found a mystic paradise of sunset beaches and rum-soaked palm trees. He returned to Los Angeles just in time for an auspicious event, the end of Prohibition. Gant rented a 25-seat bar in Hollywood and filled it with nautical knickknacks that he had collected in his travels. Don's Beachcomber was born after he legally changed his name to Don Beach. A one-time bootlegger, he created his own unique rum-based drinks, which he called Rum Rhapsodies. The bar was a post-Prohibition hit, and the tiki culture was officially born. Needless to say, he had a lot of competitors and people who were inspired by them, but none more famous than, of course, Trader Vic's. In 1934, Victor Bergeron opened Hinky Dinks, known for its low prices on, as the sign said, booze and chow. Inspired by a visit to Don the Beachcomber, Bergeron closed Hinky Dinks for some major renovations. It reopened as the original Trader Vic's, complete with signature cocktails like the Fog Cutter and the Scorpion Bowl. Victor Bergeron is credited for inventing the Mai Tai, though Don Beach claimed it was a knockoff of his own invention, the QB Cooler. Ray Haller opened the Seven Seas nightclub on Hollywood Boulevard, direct from across the street from Grauman's Chinese Theater. Along with a prerequisite Polynesian decor, there were nightly tropical storms created by spraying water on a corrugated tin roof. But the club fell on hard times. And in fact, when I was a kid in high school, we used to go there, and at that point it was just an all-ages dance club. I don't even know if they serve food still. And I didn't notice the tiki decor, but we just would go there because it was all ages, but it was pretty sketchy. And in fact, the nickname the locals had for it was the Seven Sleaze. So, advertisements for the South Seas promised an exotic Hawaiian atmosphere and delicious dinners prepared by female chefs. That changed when new owner Herb Ward took over. Under his management, The only women working at the club were the ones stripping nightly on stage. One dancer with the stage name of Dimples Morgan was arrested for her fig leaf dance. According to the arresting officers, the fig leaf wasn't big enough and that she, quote unquote, exposed her person to the view of the noisy crowd. But there is one tiki place that is still around and is still wonderful. The Fairmont is one of San Francisco's oldest and most luxurious places to stay. At one time, the hotel had 5 different themed nightclubs, but only the Tonga Room survives, and it hasn't changed much since it opened in 1945. A top 40 cover band plays on a floating barge in the lagoon. Tropical storms blow through every 30 minutes, and the famous poo-poo platter is still on the menu. So, for the most part, I've been sharing stories of places that are long gone, only remembered by the regulars who ate, drank, laughed, danced, and lived a tiny part of their lives there. But not all of these businesses have given up the good fight. Let me present to you this brief roll call of old school joints that are still around today. You can still get a bacon wrapped steak at the Derby, and you can definitely get some of the avocado toast at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And it's not too late to grab a filet mignon or a basket of garlic bread at the smokehouse, and you certainly shouldn't miss a martini at Musso and Frank's. So these are places that have been around 50, 60, 70, 80 years. Musso's just had its 100th anniversary. So it's definitely like any occasion you can to go give them your business, I highly recommend. So before I wrap this up, I'd like to share one last cocktail story with you. In the summer of 1943, famed lyricist Johnny Mercer was sitting at the bar in P.J. Clark's on 3rd Avenue in Manhattan. Over the course of a few drinks, he came up with the lyrics to the classic Torch song, "One for My Baby and One More for the Road." He was getting over a long, drawn-out affair he had been having with Judy Garland. Mercer scribbled the words on a cocktail napkin to show his musical partner, composer Harold Arlen. A few months later, Fred Astaire was singing the tune in the musical comedy The Sky's the Limit. Fast forward to the spring of 1958. Frank Sinatra was in the Capitol Records studio recording his album, Frank Sinatra Sings for Only the Lonely. One for My Baby was the key track on the record. Frank was still nursing his own broken heart over his affair with Ava Gardner, and he nailed the song in one take. It was his Valentine to all the broken promises ever scrawled on a cocktail napkin and sealed with a lipstick kiss. And it was Frank's version that became the last call soundtrack on every jukebox across the country. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my
So we have time for questions. Are you ready to take some questions?
I would love to take some questions. Who would like to ask you a question? Let's go start.
You
do it.
No, you got it.
All right, start with that man in the back.
Just wanted to know how many napkins do you have in your collection?
It's so hard to tell because, you know, the napkins stack. So it's like, I'll think, oh, I have a stack. How many can that be? And it'll actually turn out to be 100. So I have, someone at another presentation, they asked me how I organize them. Did I have them in little plastic envelopes and labeled? And I go, no, they're all in a bunch of tubs. But I mean, it's got to be 2,000 to 3,000 at least, easy. Ma'am?
How often have you found duplicates? Are they all unique or?
No. Because like, I think a lot of them came from those kits. So I will get a lot of the same napkin, but with a different bar on it, or maybe just not a bar at all. But as far as like a specific one, it's weird. It's like, there's no rhyme or reason. There are certain, like for example, places, you know, I did the event in Palm Springs and I was embarrassed I don't have a single Palm Springs one. And yet I've got dozens for Bakersfield. You know, I only got my first napkin for San Diego the other day, but you know, West Covina, I got you covered. It's interesting. And I think it's because back in the 50s, especially in the 60s, you know, all these new neighborhoods that, you know, we kind of take for granted, but like, you know, Covina or you know, these the newer neighborhoods, they would just go there. They would go to their local bars. They didn't like come into Los Angeles. They didn't come to Hollywood. And there was, you know, so many of them And those are the napkins that I tend to find the most of, and it tends to be some of the most fun ones, because those ones aren't from the little boxes and samples. You know, I'm amazed at how elaborate some of the artwork is. Like, you know, like that somebody spent some time and money making those and printing those, and not just one color too. So, anyways. Oh, right here,
I
sir.
have a friend who's a young Greek woman, and she'd never heard of the concept of a cocktail napkin. So I was wondering, is it a predominantly or uniquely American tradition, or are cocktail napkins found in Europe and elsewhere?
I can't say for sure, but they do come up once in a while in auctions. And it's interesting because I'll give you the really short version. I used to have this in my talk, but I got rid of it. But the origin of cocktail napkins was this British firm in the 1800s went to China, who was, you know, pretty much paper comes from China. They pretty much originated paper. And they would use little squares of paper when they would have their tea. And this British firm bought a bunch of them. They were a shipping firm, and they bought a bunch of them, brought them back to London, and put their name of their firm and handed these out as souvenirs at a Christmas party. And that's literally what started cocktail napkins, and especially the idea of engraved cocktail napkins. So every once in a while I will see ones from China that are really interesting, delicate little paper, and will have patterns on them, but not like names and stuff. And oddly, I'll get ones from Eastern Europe, and their paper is really weird. It's waxy. It's very, like, it doesn't soak up water even. It doesn't really work as a napkin, but I guess that must be cheaper that way or something. But they do come up every once in a while. Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever encountered any of the original art, camera-ready art for any of these, or know anything
No,
about any of the illustrators?
when I first started writing the book, I spent a lot of time trying to research the business side of it, and there were some companies like Wisconsin was the paper mill, or paper capital of the country in the 50s and 60s. There was dozens of paper mills in Wisconsin, and there were a lot of companies like Beach and Wisconsin Paper that would put out products, and they would put out, like, you know, sometimes you'll see at the swap meet these little box sets of cocktail napkins that will have a theme, like here's all pink elephants, or here's, and they would sell those. But again, they didn't credit the artist. But that's the closest I could ever find to a behind the scenes, as it were. It's an unheralded art form. I'm going to go right in order. Right back there, Rick.
Wondered if, in your collection, have you found any that have little notes, phone numbers?
You know, that is actually one of my big disappointments. I'm dying to get the napkin that's got, like, you know, thanks for last night with the lipstick kiss. I've got a few that will have, like, the comments, like great whiskey sours. I have one that has a very unfortunate stereotypical drawing of someone that I couldn't use in the collection because it's very dated, but let's just say it's World War II, and let it go at that. It's wonderfully done drawing and incredibly bad taste. But that's about it. Yeah, that's if people ask me what napkin would you like to get, that's the one with the mash note on the back with the phone number or the love letter. Sir.
What do you think is the most likely origin story for the word cocktail? I know there are at least 2 or 3.
Yeah, there's a couple, and actually, it's in the book. I do get into the history of cocktail napkins in little tiny bits. And there's a few stories. My memory won't be great at this, but apparently in the Revolutionary War, there were French soldiers that were helping to fight the British, helping the Americans fight the British, the American colonies. And there was a bunch of French soldiers that were in this farmhouse restaurant, and the woman was like hooking them up with dinner and stuff, thanking them for helping. And she gave them some sort of drink, and she put a feather of a rooster to stir it. And they made some joke about, you know, the cocktail. And apparently that's one of the stories. There's a couple of other ones that are just as kind of ridiculous, but so no one knows for sure. But it's in the book. If you buy the book, you'll find it. Yes.
Do you ever go into to a bar today and see anybody who has cocktail napkins?
They're actually making a comeback. Eric, he and his partner travel a lot for work and for fun, and they're obsessed with tiki bars. And Eric is he's the director of the Museum of Neon in Glendale, and is also on some other historical preservation things. So he does a lot of places, and he always comes back with napkins for me. They're never as elaborate as the ones like these ones. They usually just have the name of the restaurant. But every once in a while, there's a really wonderful new restaurant that just opened in Eagle Rock called the Capri Club on Eagle Rock Boulevard, and they've got these napkins that are wonderful with a drawing of the Eagle Rock with an eagle flying over it and the Capri. So I think they're making a comeback. Anyone else?
Don't fight now.
You go.
Have you ever had any interest in collecting cloth cocktail napkins?
Cloth ones?
Yeah, that have been embroidered by.
Yeah, it's also pretty popular, and I have a few, but they tend to be a lot more expensive. Like a halfway decent vintage cloth napkin is going to be $30, $40, $50, and I'd like to try and spend $2. Yes?
Is this like the gateway item to menus and matchbooks?
There are so many other people to collect them. In fact, there is a Los Angeles Society of Matchbook Collectors that is 75 years old. There were people 75 years ago collecting old matches. That's weird, but cool. But and there are a lot of groups that do that. But napkins don't happen. In fact, I've discovered as I've done events and met other people that collect and sort of become part of that world a little bit, I've discovered I'm now known as the cocktail napkin guy. That's my name, the cocktail napkin. So I guess there's some pride in that. Yes?
So we heard about how you got into collecting cocktail napkins, but is there anything that you've gotten into because of cocktail napkins? Like
Cocktails. No, seriously, I drink wine for the most part. And just because of the book, I started exploring and I want to see what a QB cooler tastes like. But no, not really. I mean, it's so easy to go off in tangents, like menus. That's even more obscure, but the paper menus that they would give you in restaurants, that's a world that's out there. There's people who collect coasters, but I'm like, one obsession is enough for me. I'm good.
Any last questions from the audience?
Do you know the history of the first box that you found that you were going to look through and maybe get a couple and then you got the whole box? Was that just a third-party person?
Yeah, it was just an estate sale. I've actually gotten friendly with that guy, but it was just, it was like one of those things where it was somebody must have had a collection because they were in great shape. That's the other thing that's interesting is sometimes you get napkins and they look like, somebody drove the car over them, and then sometimes they're like pristine, like they were printed yesterday. And that box, I think that's one of the reasons I got hooked, is most of them are pristine, but he didn't have any. So yeah, no, I can't give credit. I give him credit.
Gloria?
Is there one cocktail napkin that you would covet having in your collection from a specific venue?
There isn't any specific restaurant.
Titanic, maybe?
Huh?
Titanic.
Oh, well, I mean, the one with the guy drew the Oscar on it, that'd be the one. Or Johnny Mercer's lyrics, also would not be upsetting to have that. Yeah, there isn't any one place. Now I'm like, that's the thing I would look for is some cool art, somebody's text or a note. That would be my coveted find. A nice little love note would be great.
Great. I see we're out of questions, so no round of applause. Are you going to be around to sign some books if people want books?
Twist my arm.
Twist his arm. So we do have books in the back for sale, and Patrick will sign them if you'd like a signed book.
Walk this way.
Walk that way. Thank you to our presenter, Patrick Quinn, and to you for attending this Book Club of California program. It's great to see you all. Please join us for our next program. It's going to be Monday, March 13th at 6 o'clock. It's in person and virtual. It's going to be taking place in San Francisco, but you can watch it on Zoom. It's titled Before Baedeker, Travel Guidebooks to 1840. And it's by a gentleman named Bill Newland, who is a publisher, and it collector of travel guides. Competing with the activity in the back. So I'm going to wrap up and say thank you all for coming. Hope to see you at the next book club event. There are calendars on your tables if you'd like to take a calendar for all of our events. Thank you, everyone.